Hello and welcome to another episode of the Karak Chat podcast.
An FTI podcast where we talk about everything with women in construction.
We are your host, I'm Nisreen.
And I'm Kate, and we have today with us an amazing guest, Khushboo from Tamimi.
Hello, Kate and Nisreen. Nice to be here.
Hello.
Hello,
We're very
happy
happy to have you here. So in today's episode, which we have titled Construction Clarity, we are diving into the world of record keeping in the construction industry, whether you are managing a small innovation project or running a massive infrastructure, record keeping is essential. It might be the difference between winning or losing a legal dispute or arbitration.
Yeah, it's quite a good topic, and that's why we have our guest today. And let me just tell a little bit of your amazing background, Khushboo. Khushboo working as a senior counsel with Tamimi, and I need to read it because it's so much here. She was ranked as a future leader in arbitration by Who is Who Legal, and also recognized as a rising star by Legal 500 for her expertise in construction. That's why it's no surprise that we have her here. And also, you have a lot of experience in different disputes, in different jurisdictions, and under different rules, and so on. So we are really glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Kate. I'm delighted to be here as well with Nasreen and yourself.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And we are here, obviously, women in construction. Yeah. And I would like to start our conversation with a particular question. What do you think about women in construction? What our impact on the field? Do we need more women in construction?
So from my perspective, when it comes to women in construction, I think just like we have it in every sector, having more women is obviously helping with the whole agenda for diversity and for inclusion. And every sector has this issue where we don't have as much representation for women, let alone we have these issues in construction because it's seen as more of a male-heavy industry, as we all know. But I think what's important is we are mindful that having more women in construction is not so much quantity assessment. It's not having more women just there in the workforce, but having them in decision-making roles, having them as leaders in management roles. So if we have 80% of women in the construction sector, but none of them have key decision-making powers, what's the point of that, right? So we need to be mindful that we need to see women more as leaders in construction, in the project management, and then as experts in the construction arbitration phase and as lawyers. And I think that's when the change will have a ripple effect. The more we see women there out there in these leadership roles, the more we will start to then, people will get accustomed to the idea of having women in these roles and be mindful of hiring more women, of engaging them more in these roles.
I absolutely agree, and we have a big difference
I
in
could
the
not
recent
agree
years.
more.
Yeah.
So, Khushboo, I know you have extensive experience in working in different regions and jurisdiction. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience and is there like different challenges or opportunity you encounter in these regions?
I mean, the beauty of construction, I think, is that there's so many commonalities in construction project disputes across the world. And when I work, say, for example, in a construction dispute in Asia, when I work in the Middle East or in other projects now in Africa and other regions, the issues are very much the same. Everybody has the same appetite for risk, for wanting the projects to go on. So I think that's one of the beauties of being in the construction industry. The one nuance I would say is that when it comes to appetite for sometimes risk for settling in an ongoing construction arbitration, you can see a lot of variance depending on where the client's actually from. So if I were to advise a client in Asia that, look, this is the time you've got to capitalize on pressure points and settle, chances are they would take my advice and they would settle. They would sort of, want me to go guns blazing, try to negotiate a good settlement and get to the point where they can avoid the whole arbitration. But it's not so much the case in the Middle East. And there have been many instances where when we are, at the point where expert reports have been filed and we understand where the weaknesses of the case lies, it's not that we won't strategize to overcome them. Of course we will, but there comes a point of time where we tell the client, if you want to mitigate the risk, because arbitration ultimately is a process that's out of our hands. We are not the decision makers. And there's always going to be that level of uncertainty in an arbitration. To avoid that uncertainty, to avoid that exposure, settlement is always going to be the best option as long as you get a settlement in the range where you're happy with. We tell the clients in the Middle East, look, this is the time now we can, if you want us to, go ahead with the pressure points, there's sometimes not a lot of incentive to do this because of the whole value on losing face.
Yeah, correct.
And I'm sure you see it even
Yeah.
with your clients where they don't want to be seen as maybe losing precious face or trying to make it seem like their case is weak when it isn't. But this is something I would say is one of the biggest differences in Asia and the Middle East.
So, Khushboo, given our topic today about record keeping, did you have any story to share with us about challenges you faced in one of your cases?
So the starting point is that there's never going to be a situation or a case where an expert finds every single record it's looking for. And that's just not feasible because we come in the projects, both as lawyers and as experts, many, many years down the line after the project was first started or even many years after the completion. Yeah. And at that point of time, when the project was going on, the project management team, the client's team probably didn't even think about these claims. So no one goes into a project thinking, well, we're going to make this claim in an arbitration after 10 years. So you could have a disruption claim, for example, which you didn't even think you were going to, and there might be certain records missing. Or sometimes if you're acting for a subcontractor down the chain, they don't even have access to those sophisticated softwares that are used like Conjunct or Econex. So that sometimes tend to happen. Then you have the classic case where records are just not stored properly. They're stored physically in these cardboard boxes. And then you have issues with the archiving, which I'm sure you both have experienced. And we struggle with the same issues. There's never going to be an instance where everything's perfect. There's always going to be situations where you might have lack of records. You might have something you need, but you don't have. So the starting point really is that. And then when you already understand that this is the premise, it makes it easier to think about strategies around it. Having dialogues. I think the synergy between the lawyers team and the experts team is crucial because we need to understand the extent to which what you really need is so essential for your assessment as quantum experts. And then we can relay this back to the clients. And very often when I have situations where we have multiple RFIs being issued from the quantum experts, sometimes as much as 20, 30, they're just being issued without any proper replies back. It gets very frustrating for the clients because they are really struggling. It's not that these records are not there, but they're really struggling. It takes ages sometimes to find certain bits and pieces of documents because of the way it's now being stored or archived because of the tools, as I said. So we need to understand the extent to which we could probably make sensible sampling assessments, how much, how less, strategies around this. And I think that's something that dialogue needs to happen very early on.
Yeah, I think I totally agree as well. I think often people who's working on site or during the project, they don't really think about it as it's, oh, this might be evidence in future dispute. Yeah. And I think that's why there's always some missing record. I had like similar experience. I was involved recently as well in arbitration case when we had a lot of records, like we had a lot of contemporaneous records, but actually the record which is related for our work as delay expert was really missing, especially the one related to the critical path of the project. And they were not categorized, not according to delay events or main events, and we needed literally to go search all MBRs, all minutes of meetings, just to be able to find some evidence, which was, time consuming and make our task way harder.
Oh.
Kate, do you have any? I see you laughing. Do you have any similar challenges?
Like our job is in records. I think it's going in parallel all the time. And I had an experience with one of the projects, and it was very long project. It was 12 years lasting project. And you can imagine the amount of the records and like with thousands of workers and so on. And in quantum we dealing with costs. And there was situation when we already compile of records and presenting our draft report, and we find out there is like 2 years of records, absolutely 2 separate remote years missing. And we had a meeting with the site team trying to figure out what's going on. And the team was absolutely honest, like, you know what, this particular year we had a fire, all records has been destroyed. I think, okay, no problem, but what happened to this year? It's a separate year. By that time you had learned your lessons, so I think you have like a fire protection and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, we had a flood. so yeah, I was quite shocked and like I could not stop thinking about, I wish this flood and fire happened like in the same time, so we'd secure at least half a year of information, but unfortunately, it's not always the case.
So that resonates with me as well, because I have situations like this where this happens also again quite often in Middle Eastern projects. One of my very first cases in the Middle East when I moved from Singapore was a case where we were acting for one of the former ministers in the GCC, and obviously he was one of the ministerial figures, so he would just call us to his boardrooms for these meetings as and when he wanted. And every time we spoke and discussed all the lacunas and gaps we had, he was very confident that these were there. He had these in his arsenal, and somebody in his, team would send this to us. As soon as he disappeared, nobody would do anything. There was also that fear they had with the ministerial figure. So in front of him, things would be very different, and then behind his back, the experts were getting frustrated. So were we, that we were not getting the right amount of information. So I know exactly what you mean. And again, you have to think very out of the box in such situations, because we have timelines that are running against us, right? So in that case, what I decided to do was to bring in my team, bring in one of the experts team, and we sat in the site office for months. We had no choice, because if not, nothing would have been forthcoming for us. And we sat in front of them, and then they were going through their records on the computers, physically printing stuff for us and giving to us. And it was such an old-fashioned way, but if we didn't do that, we wouldn't even have gotten anything to help us substantiate all of the claims we were making in this arbitration. And because we did this process, you won't believe it, we actually found that surplus materials in this project was being stolen.
Wow.
And nobody even realized this. So, it called into question the surveillance team, it called into question the proper records. And because we already came to a point where we were quite comfortable with the evidence and records that we could prove this was being stolen by the other side, we then had to make an urgent application to tag this on into our claims. So all of this wouldn't even have happened if we didn't take that, robust and proactive action to bring the experts, bring our team, sit in. So I think this again goes back to the point I'd mentioned. The synergy between the lawyers and the experts in any case is just so critical.
It sounds as a very success story, and I have to say, records, it's very important in my day-to-day work. And Nisreen working in delay and I'm working in quantum. So we are going in parallel, in particular, when we're addressing prolongation costs. And as you know, like for prolongation costs, the actual records, this is like a body of the claim, body of the success for them. And that's why we need very good records in this particular area. And when I say good records, what I mean, like the basis for my assessment will be cost ledger. And how many times I saw cost ledger which have like maybe 100 lines, and it will be one lump item for 20 million, and then you're opening this particular 20 million item, it's gonna be records for 3 years, lumped in one item, for different activity, for different areas, and so on. So sometimes I'm surprised that people not put enough attention for the record keeping, especially like for the cost. But because we all going in a dispute, but at the end of the day, all disputes ending up with a award which consists of money award. So it's all about money at the end of the day. So why won't you keep your records in a very, very good way? So in talking to this, what do you think? Because I think a lot of our listeners, like in construction, thinking about the records, maybe sometimes they exposed with so many records that they don't know which one in particular they need to focus on. Could you list some of the important records which is must have, just highest attentions, highest details and so on to have?
So I might take a step back because when it comes to records, I think that's essential for any case. I don't think it's critical because you have to work with what you have, and I think that's when early strategizing comes into play. There's a difference, I think, when it comes to quantum and delay experts, because I think when it comes to a delay assessment, when you're looking at critical parts, you have at your arsenal a wider range of evidences, right? Because a correspondence, a witness statement would probably be a little bit more essential and effective for you than it is to a quantum expert. But when it comes to, I think, 3 core claims from my perspective, disruption, prolongation, and rectification works, I think that's when the records is extremely essential. Without those records for these claims, it's very hard to support. It's very hard for you as a quantum expert to make an assessment. Then it's very hard for the tribunal to make an assessment for our client's favor. I would say like delay events, variations, you still have a little bit of leeway with witness statements or sometimes it could be something you see in a progress report, a daily report,
updated
right?
program, correct.
Yeah. So for me, that's really a nuance. I think it's worth to make between delay and quantum experts. But when it comes to ledgers, as you said, Kate, I think we see this a lot where everything's lumped up, where you can't really break down unit rates and prices, and then the risk is then a global claim is being alleged, and you probably see this more than anything, right? What's the way to really solve it, to help it? Is just, I would say, having a proper document team in the client's project team, obviously, to sit there to break it down to the extent that they can break it down. But somebody needs to go through it. It needs to be a QS. It needs to be a document controller if it's many years later. Sometimes the way it's being recorded in the software, they don't have that sort of line by line item breakdown. What can we do then? We are there in the project after many years, but there's still a way around it. You can get a CFO, you can get someone from the finance team of the clients to sit there and explain the way the software puts in all of these data, digests this data, and gives us the record. That's one way of doing it. The second way is just to go through it manually. There's no other shortcut to it. If you want to avoid a global claim, there's no other shortcut. And again, depends on which side you're on, depends on the strategies that are involved. But there's always going to be ways around these issues that you probably face. It's just a matter of someone taking the time and effort to understand what needs to be done firstly, and then secondly, do it.
It's very important. I had my ex-colleague, and he taught me one thing when I joined FTI, and he told me the most important person you need to know when you work on any project, it's a document controller.
Yeah.
Because he is the key for everything what you need to know. And of course, site team is there as well, but we face it so many times when records not kept in a proper way. And just, I think it's always, my father taught me, and he said, Kate, the way how you can avoid any problem, just think about the worst scenario. And for like thinking about it, can you give us the worst scenario? What can happen if you have a poor records? What's the worst scenario? What's from legal perspective? What's the impact of poor records?
The impact is just you're going to lose the claim, obviously. And I think that's really the bottom line. But having said that, I think, I mean, and I keep going back to the same point, I feel, is that we need to understand from the clients also what is missing early on. And I think sometimes there's a tendency for clients not to be forthcoming to lawyers, to experts, because they don't want to show any weaknesses in their claims. But, on the contrary, and there's really a difference, firstly, between the expert's roles and the lawyer's role. Your role is to the tribunal to make an independent assessment of what you have in front of you, whereas our role is really to support our client's case to the best way possible. And there's a slight distinction here. And obviously, everybody has a duty overall to the tribunal. But we can go in there and do the initial strategy, tell the client how we can explain weaknesses in a way that sometimes experts feel they're not able to. So that's why early discussion with the client's team, early discussion then for us to talk to our experts to understand how they can better or strengthen their assessment. I think that's something that should be done. And in every case, and this is something which I have also time and time again explained to our clients that, you need to tell us so we can strategize and discuss it. I can tell you in all my cases, every single argument or position taken by our experts, whether it's delay, it's quantum, or it's a technical expert, is discussed with us. We want to be involved. It doesn't mean we're going to change their opinion. And we can't, because if an expert is a good expert, is a experienced expert, like how you all would probably be in your cases, you know that if something is missing, if evidence is missing, you can't make an assessment, because then it's going to be damaging to your credibility, and in fact, you will lose the case.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't make an assessment if you don't have something. So it's not so much about us convincing the expert; it's more about assisting the expert in giving you a basis to make your assessment. And that needs to happen quite early on with the clients. And I think when clients or when the project team understands this is the role, everybody wants to help them, but they are waiting for something to help them. That's when things get more forthcoming and you see lots of changes and difference in the attitude. Now, going back to your point on poor record keeping, if we are in a situation where there's poor record keeping, there's not much we can do. We can't go back in time and change it. It is what it is. But having open dialogues, having these discussions will help us to overcome these hurdles, to come to a point where we can then convince the client that something has happened to these records. It could be even the CEO of the company putting in a witness statement, like you said in your case, about there was a flood, there was a fire, using the research, using evidences in the witness statement to show that they're not lying, that that particular month and year there was a rainfall that happened that was particularly high, causing a flood. And we have had many situations where we have to use all of these scientific data to prove floods when we have defective works, for example, as claims. So it's really the same, using the same analogy, we can just put that in a witness statement to explain to the tribunal why so and so records are missing. But there will always be something more, right? There will always be something in the computers, something the other side has, and that's when disclosure becomes so important in an arbitration process.
Actually, Khushboo, I would just like to jump on this point. Given your extensive experience as well in arbitration, what do you think the different steps you could use between different dispute resolution, say between arbitration and litigation, and this disclosure process?
Yeah. So I think one of the most essential tools in an arbitration is disclosure, because it gives you the avenue to ask for documents as long as obviously they're relevant and you can prove that they are necessary for the tribunal's decision-making process. But you can ask for any single evidence, information, or record relating to the claims or relating to the other side's counterclaims. And that's a tool which we need to use very early on. We need to start thinking about how to use it very early on, because oftentimes, as Kate was saying, we don't have it's not that the records are not there, it's just that we don't have the records. And if that's a situation where the other side's trying to hold on to the records, disclosure is such a great way we can get it there early on and make the tribunal grant the award to us, and we get these records to help the experts. You need to be very careful how you play it with disclosure, because I've seen many cases where we ask for too much or the other side asks us for too much, and that irritates the tribunal. So we need to be very careful on how to draw the balance. And the trick really is to put in as much details as possible in terms of what you're asking. So if, for example, you're asking for reports or records, don't say just reports. Specify, is it daily, is it monthly, is it yearly? And in any big project, you're not going to just have one source of reports, right? You're going to have one from the employer side, one from the main contractor, and one from each subcontractor. So specify exactly whose records are you looking for, specify the duration, as much details as possible. And chances are you will get it if you put in all of these proper parameters to show the tribunal that it's not a fishing expedition. You are truly requesting it because it's required for your experts. One of the cases that I'm working on right now, the disclosure got so prolonged, and it's been 4 months, it's still going on, that we can't come up with a resolution. And I can tell you that even the tribunal is very frustrated, because all they really want is, if an order has been made, is for the other side to be forthcoming. So it looks really terrible if an order is made against that party, and they're just using all of these procedural nuances and facades to try to prevent that document from being handed over. So it looks so bad, and already impressions are being formed. And ultimately, in an arbitration, the people that are making that decision, they're human beings, right? They're fallible human beings that will be susceptible to these impressions, and these impressions will then form or impact their decision-making role when writing the award.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
You talk about this fishing of the records. I really like the way how you call it. But what I was thinking at the time, because usually like arbitration process, it's very time restricted. We have a procedural order. We need to stay within the timeline. So would you recommend to your client just to come and for advice before going for a dispute, and just sit with you, discuss the strategy, and set up all those records just before going to arbitration, to ensure that you have everything, just to prepare that you are ready for this fight?
Absolutely. Some of the more successful cases I've had where it was very seamless for us to progress to arbitration from the, let's say, dispute avoidance stage till the point where the client was ready to sign off on initiating the arbitration process, was those cases where we had a very big claims team involved with us, and we were involved sometimes even 2-3 years in the project before the arbitration is initiated. And that's always helpful, because every time a correspondence was being drafted, issued to the other side, we were vetting it. We knew what had to go in. We knew what shouldn't be going in a way that was controlled, in a way that we knew if it's going to be used later on in the arbitration, it would be to our advantage. So in the same way, then we would just be discussing issues with the claims team. They would be preparing all of the EOT and variation claims in a structured way to make sure all the evidence was in, so that the other side can't make the argument later on that, well, so and so records or evidences were missing. Early engagement is always useful, is always helpful. It doesn't happen in every project. I think just to be a little bit cost sensitive, it needs to be that kind of project which is large enough. If it's a World Cup stadium, if it's a large infrastructure, a highway project, or if it's, say, like a big solar power plant, these are projects I think there should be early engagement quite early on. It doesn't happen sometimes in the more silo projects, and that's okay. We can still come and do the strategy before the arbitration is initiated. But having that synergy and interaction with the claims team and us is always going to be helpful.
I have to say we had experience quite often when we're helping our client to prepare their claims.
Yeah.
And it's, yes, I can see the difference. And in particular, when we're stepping in the expert role to the project, different project, and figure out that this job which we did for other clients haven't been done.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely different level of effort required for bringing the success, because we are trying to do our best all the time.
But you can see it though, right? Because sometimes when we are not involved early on, later on in the arbitration, we see these letters that were being drafted in an absolutely ridiculous, aggressive way. And then it sort of shows the tribunal that the client was not being reasonable. And ultimately, the arbitration is all about optics, it's all about strategy. So you need to also, whether you have a good claim or bad claim, you need to appear reasonable to the tribunal.
It's absolutely true. But again, coming back to our question, and again, my strategy for worst scenario, like, can we just, three of us sitting here, just set up a strategy? You already mentioned a couple of tricks which can help it on that, tricks how to close the records, missing records points. So we are in a situation, there is particular records are missing. What would be your steps or advice how to overcome this?
I think I'll just add on Kate's point here, because we talked about physical records and the Kate incidents with the flood and the fire. And then you touch a little bit about the technology and using technology in record keeping. I think it will be good to be able to distinguish what is the steps we can do in terms of, like, if we're using any technology platform or if we have physical records.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way around poor records that if you're already faced with that in a project or in a case is thinking out of the box, as I said. And there's so many ways we could do it. So witness statement is an obvious avenue to fill in the gaps. But you don't just have that. In some of my cases, what we did is we gave the experts a live demonstration of the limitations of the software tools that they use. So the accounting and the ledger softwares had certain limitations where it was difficult to extract certain data without the right parameters, or it was done through an old-fashioned system, for example. And then we recorded that live demonstration and we put it as part of a witness statement. So that's a way we show the tribunal that it's not that we are not giving the proper records to our experts. It's just that the system has its own limitations because it's an old system, it's an old project. To show the tribunal that whatever the expert has, we did the demonstration, now they can see that video. So that was one way. And then I think the other way also is about having the right audits. Sometimes we put in the audit statements and then we make the CFO or some of the directors of the finance team write a witness statement to verify the accuracy of these audited statements. That's another way that we can overcome the loopholes. And then there's another way for quantum experts to do this by themselves is make a reasonable assessment. You can say what's lacking, and then you say in the report that in your experience, you think this is reasonable for so-and-so reasons. And I think that comes across as credible because you are conceding that you didn't see it, but then you also make an assessment because you have that experience and the level of sophistication that a client's team at a fact witness wouldn't have.
Yeah, I have to say this is the way how we're trying to approach, because quite often what we see is a fact that the cost has been incurred. You cannot deny something built there in place, but there is no records. As a quantum expert, you can't say it's zero. It's obviously it's not a zero. This is the way when we already, based on available records, we preparing the methodology of assessment, and yes, reasonable assessments of reasonableness, and we're trying to go out with ideas how it can be. But it's very important what we're trying to make in the expert report, just to ensure that we spell out what basically was to tribunal, what was in front of us, what make us think this way, why we're producing. But because what we're trying to do in our role, we're trying to assist the tribunal, and it's tribunal even in worse situation, in more worse situations than us. At least we have this all cost records and data behind to understand, like at least like a proximity how much it costs. For the tribunals, they're like sometimes blind spot because it can be anyone. So it can be people who are not involved in construction. So we really need to help and give our hand from our side, but in the same time to remain within our expertise.
I mean, you'll see in most arbitration hearings for construction projects that the tribunal always has a lot more questions to the quantum experts. And then there's a lot more homework for the quantum experts to do after the hearing, because ultimately it's your assessment. If you can't make a specific assessment, it's a secondary assessment, or it's a range that the tribunal needs to use in rendering the award.
So going back to Kate's point, actually, what are your 5 top steps to close the gap and to avoid have gap in record keeping from the start?
So if I had to narrow down 5, I mean, it could be, it's endless really. I think the first tip would be keeping logs, correspondence logs, RFI logs, NCR logs. Whether you have these documents as backup is secondary, but once you have these logs, it really helps us. I think it also really helps you, both of you, when you're dealing in arbitration, to even understand and know whether you have these documents or not. And then it's the next exercise of locating and identifying those documents. So keeping good logs, I think, is crucial. Whether you have those software tools or not, it's secondary, right? I think having those logs is still a great way of just having or knowing or understanding what you have within the records that you could use eventually. The second tip I would have is that if there are multiple sources of data that are capturing the same information, for example, I have many cases where site access dates are recorded in the progress reports, they're recorded in other reports, then there's a different log for it, and the dates are not uniform, then it makes it difficult for the experts to understand which source of data they need to rely on. Sometimes these data come from different parties. One of it comes from the subcontractor, one of it comes from the main contractor, or somewhere down the chain, the developer. Employers sometimes have different data as well. So it makes it difficult then for the tribunal to understand which source of data they should even accept, because they don't know, they don't understand. And it makes the whole process a little bit more protracted. If you had the same source of data, then at least the tribunal has the assurance that the experts have the underlying basis is the same. So then the assessment might be obviously different, but the source of data shouldn't be disputed to the extent possible. My third tip would be have a document control in place, and this is what we had discussed, and that is so crucial. I cannot also understate this, because it needs to be, these are the people that will really be able to locate the documents at the right time, at the right juncture of the arbitration that we need. Sometimes we need something so urgently, it's 2 days before submission. Do we have this to cover the gaps? It's a document controller that will be able to just pull it out for us really quickly. My fourth tip would be, if there's something that's being issued, for example, a NCR, a non-compliance report to show that defective works or something's not being constructed properly, make sure there's a follow-up to it, because very often in an arbitration, we don't know when it was closed. We don't know if it was even closed, and then it comes to a point of who is liable, whether it was still us, whether someone else had took over the project. So having this follow-up is important, and it will help us to show the tribunal that, well, this issue was protracted because there was no close, there was no the follow-up continued, and the issue didn't get closed. So it's the same for RFIs, the same for if there's a shop drawing comment. So same issue, just follow up. And my final top tip would be, take advantage of the AI and technology tools that we have in the industry. And when I say take advantage, I don't mean just buying into the software and administering it. I mean actually using it effectively, which means if there's some documents that need to be uploaded, scan it in a way that's OCR, where the dates and the subject matters can be searched properly, put in the right filters in, put in the right date parameters in, and training up the document controller team to make sure that all of this process can be monitored properly. And I think that's essential. If you want to take advantage of AI, there has to be that element of human monitoring that goes hand in hand with AI, with these technology tools.
It's perfect advice. I think everybody will benefit from it. And I think we covered a lot of ground for this Records Keep It today. But before we go to wrapping up of our amazing meeting, I would like to know a little bit more about you, like about your life in the Middle East, like a woman in construction. What do you think about your experience? And in particular, I consider us future leaders. This is like, as we discussed at the beginning, it's our aim to be here. And you are a rising star in construction. Can you give us a little bit of your experience?
Sure. I mean, when I moved to the Middle East, must be about 7, 8 years ago now. For a very long time, I was frequently the only female involved in the whole construction arbitration, from the client's team, from the legal team. There was also not many female lawyers in construction at that point. There was also no female representation from the other side's construction team. So very often there could be a boardroom with maybe 20 different professionals in the arbitration, and I'll be the only female. I see this slowly changing. I don't think we've actually just reached that yet. I see this slowly changing, and I think the pace of the change probably needs to pick up a little bit. And as I said earlier, it's not about just having more women in the industries, but having more women as senior leaders, as role models for the younger lawyers, for the younger experts, and for the just younger construction professionals to look up to. And to see that, look, if they can do it, so can we. And that's when really change will start happening. If you see that leaders sort of setting that role models, and setting that good examples. But I think one thing which I personally don't like doing is putting these barriers in my head. I don't think about the fact that if I was the only female in the room or in a meeting, that how do I sound, or should I have said that? I try not to think about it. I try to make it seem like, this is the playing field, it's equal. I'm one of the professionals, one of the lawyers, one of the client representatives, in the same way that my male counterpart is. And I think that's the right way to really look into it, because the more you overthink it, I feel the more these barriers will sort of make shifts in, the more you will grow inconfident in or hesitate to make certain points or make certain arguments that you think you should make. And that is really, for me, the right way to look into it. And I think it's the same as leading female experts in the industry. We are still struggling also with appointing more female experts.
Yeah.
But the female experts that we have appointed, it's not like the clients actually say to us, don't appoint the male experts. There are so many cases where the right and qualified person was the female experts. And there was absolutely no pushback from the client to appoint that person. The problem comes with having that seniority, having that experience. And I think that's when the industry needs to be a little bit more attuned to that, to give everyone an equal opportunity if they have the right skill set, if they have the right experience.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. We actually really enjoyed having you, Khushboo. Your mindset, your experience is just fascinating. And we thank you so much for being with us today.
I really enjoyed our meeting. But before we wrap it up, do you want to share anything else with our listeners?
Thank you so much, Kate and Nisreen. I completely enjoyed the chat that we had in this podcast series. And I think this is a great initiative. I think for those of our listeners who are facing a construction arbitration at the moment, I think the key really is to appoint good experts and good lawyers. And they will see a huge difference in their case, because the robustness of the defense and the claim will become apparent. And having the right synergy with the experts and the lawyers is also crucial for any success in the construction arbitration.
Well, again, thank you so much, Khushboo. Thanks for our listener. And before I say goodbye, Kate, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I just want to tell our listeners, please tune in for our next episode where we'll interview more women in construction. Thank you. Bye.